Jake Morrison was fixing a broken engine when the message came through his ship's radio. The voice on the other end sounded urgent and official, which usually meant trouble for a man like Jake. He wiped grease from his hands with an old rag and answered the call. The woman speaking introduced herself as Ambassador Linda Carter from Earth's government. She told Jake something that made his stomach drop like a stone. Earth's champion fighter had been hurt badly during transport to the big tournament. They needed Jake to take his place right away. Jake stared at the radio in his small salvage ship. The Iron Phoenix was not much to look at, but it had been his home for 5 years now. He made his living by finding broken ships in space and selling their parts. It was honest work, even if it was not exciting. The last thing he expected was a call asking him to represent all of humanity in some galactic fighting tournament. The ambassador explained quickly, while Jake tried to understand what was happening. Every year the Galactic Council held a big competition called the Championship of Champions. Each alien race sent their best fighter to compete. The winners' people got special treatment for the next year, including better trade deals and more, say in important decisions. Earth had joined the council only 2 years ago, and this was their second time in the tournament. Jake knew about the tournament from news reports, but he never paid much attention. He was too busy trying to make a living in the empty spaces between stars. Now they were telling him that Commander Lisa Hayes, Earth's chosen champion, had been injured when her transport ship hit some space debris. The doctors said she would live, but she could not fight for months. The ambassador's voice grew more desperate as she explained that the tournament rules were very strict. Each race had to send someone, or they would be kicked out of the council. Earth had less than 6 hours to get a replacement to Nexus Prime, the capital world where the tournament took place. Jake's ship was the closest one to the meeting point, where a council transport waited. Jake asked why they picked him instead of another soldier or professional fighter. The ambassador admitted that most of Earth's military was too far away to reach the transport in time. Jake's file showed he had been a Marine for 8 years before becoming a salvage operator. That military experience made him the best choice. They had in a bad situation. The transport ship that picked up Jake was bigger than anything he had ever seen. It belonged to the Galactic Council and could travel between star systems in hours instead of weeks. Jake felt very small as he walked through its metal corridors. The alien crew members looked at him with what seemed like curiosity mixed with pity. None of them spoke to him directly, but he heard them talking in their strange languages. He did not need to understand the words to know they were not impressed by Earth's replacement champion. Ambassador Carl Henderson met Jake when they arrived at Nexus Prime. Henderson was a tall man with gray hair who looked tired all the time. He had been Earth's main representative to the council since humans joined. Henderson took one look at Jake's simple clothes and worried expression, then sighed deeply. He explained that they had very little time to prepare Jake for what was coming. The capital world of Nexus Prime was a sight that took Jake's breath away. Cities floated in the air above a planet-wide ocean. Buildings twisted into impossible shapes that seemed to defy gravity. Thousands of different alien ships moved through the sky like a swarm of metal insects. Jake had seen pictures before, but being there in person made him feel like he was dreaming. Henderson led Jake through a maze of corridors in the main government building. Along the way, he explained the basics of galactic politics. The council had 57 member races, but only about 20 sent fighters to the tournament each year. The others were too small or too peaceful to compete. The big powers like the Saurian Empire and the Nexus Collective dominated the competition year after year. They reached a viewing area that looked down into the main tournament arena. Jake pressed his face against the clear wall and stared. The arena was enormous, easily big enough to hold a small city. The walls and floor could change into any environment the fight required. Mountains, oceans, space stations, jungle worlds. The arena could become any of them in minutes. Henderson pointed to 3 figures standing in the center of the arena. These were Jake's competition, the other champions who would fight in the tournament. Even from far away, Jake could see that each one was terrifying in their own way. The first was Keithvar the Destroyer from the Saurian Empire. He stood over, 8 feet tall and looked like a cross between a crocodile and a dragon. His green scales seemed to shimmer with their own light. Henderson explained that Saurians could heal from almost any wound, and had strength that could crush steel. Kethvar had won the tournament 3 times in the past 10 years. The second champion was Zara 9 from the Nexus Collective. She looked mostly human, but Jake could see metal parts mixed with her flesh. Cables ran under her skin like veins, and her eyes glowed with blue light. Henderson said the Nexus Collective were beings who had combined themselves with machines to become perfect. Zara 9 could think faster than any computer and move quicker than the eye could follow. The third champion was the most alien of all. Thorg Ironhide from the Golem Federation did not look alive at all. He was made of what appeared to be living crystal that reflected rainbow colors in the arena lights. He stood perfectly still like a statue, but Henderson assured Jake that the crystal being was very much alive. Golems were nearly impossible to hurt because their bodies were harder than diamond. Thorg had never been defeated in single combat. Jake watched these 3 champions and felt his confidence disappear completely. Each one of them was a legend among their people. They had trained their whole lives for fighting. They had natural advantages that no human could match. Jake was just a former soldier who fixed broken ships for a living. Henderson seemed to read Jake's thoughts. He put a hand on the younger man's shoulder and spoke quietly. The ambassador admitted that Jake's chances were not good. Earth's scientists had studied the other champions and found no obvious weaknesses. The tournament had 3 parts: strength, wisdom, and willpower, and the other races seemed better than humans at all of them. But Henderson also reminded Jake of something important. Humans had surprised everyone by surviving long enough to join the council in the first place. Other races had predicted that Earth would destroy itself in wars or pollution. Instead, humans had learned to work together and reached for the stars. Maybe they would find a way to surprise everyone again. Jake nodded slowly as he watched the 3 champions below. He knew he was probably going to lose, but he also knew he had to try. All of humanity was counting on him now. Tomorrow, the tournament would begin, and the galaxy would see what one human could do when everything was on the line. The arena buzzed with excitement as thousands of aliens filled the viewing areas. Jake stood in the champions' preparation room trying to calm his racing heart. Through the walls, he could hear the crowd making sounds that ranged from musical to terrifying. Henderson and Elena stood nearby, both trying to look confident and failing. Elena handed Jake a small device that looked like a hearing aid. She explained that it would translate any language spoken during the fights. The tournament rules required all verbal commands and victory declarations to be understood by every participant. Jake put the device in his ear and immediately heard a dozen different alien conversations around him. The tournament master, a floating jellyfish-like creature with glowing tentacles, announced that the trial of strength would begin. Jake's name echoed through the arena, followed by polite applause from the human delegation and silence from almost everyone else. When Thorg Ironhide's name was announced, the sound was like thunder. Jake walked into the arena and felt small under the massive dome above him. The floor beneath his feet was smooth metal, but he knew it would change soon. Thorg Ironhide stood at the opposite end, looking like a statue carved from rainbow-colored diamond. The crystal being had not moved since entering the arena. The tournament master announced that the arena would simulate a mining asteroid. Jake barely had time to understand what this meant before the floor began to shift and change. Metal walls rose around them, creating tunnels and chambers like the inside of a mining station. Artificial gravity generators hummed to life, creating different levels of gravitational pull throughout the space. Thorg finally moved, walking forward with slow, measured steps. Each footstep rang like a bell against the metal floor. Jake realized that the crystal being planned to simply walk through any obstacle and crush him like a bug. Direct confrontation would be suicide. Jake ran deeper into the artificial mining station, his mind racing. He had worked on dozens of real mining operations during his salvage career. These places were dangerous even when they worked perfectly. When they broke down, they became death traps. The arena's simulation was incredibly detailed, complete with working machinery and realistic hazards. Thorg followed Jake with the patience of a mountain. The crystal being did not seem concerned about the complex environment around him. He simply walked through walls when they blocked his path, leaving crystal-shaped holes behind. Jake could hear him getting closer, the bell-like footsteps echoing through the metal corridors. Jake found what he was looking for in the station's power section. The artificial gravity generators were working at full capacity to simulate the gravitational conditions of a real asteroid mining operation. Jake had repaired similar systems many times before. He knew exactly how they worked and what would happen if they failed catastrophically. Thorg entered the power section just as Jake finished rewiring the main control panel. The crystal being looked at Jake with eyes like blue stars, tilting his head slightly as if curious about what the human was trying to do. Jake suspected that Thorg had never faced an opponent who ran away from direct combat. Jake pressed the emergency shutdown button and dove for cover behind a heavy support beam. The gravity generators overloaded and exploded in sequence, sending waves of twisted gravitational force through the mining station. Thorg, who had been walking confidently across the floor, suddenly found himself falling through what had been solid metal, the crystal being crashed through 5 levels of the mining station before the emergency systems could stabilize the artificial gravity. Jake heard the impacts echoing through the structure like a series of massive bells. When the sound stopped, the tournament master announced that Thorg Ironhide had been eliminated by falling outside the arena boundaries. Jake climbed out from behind the support beam, hardly believing what had just happened. The crowd was completely silent for several seconds before exploding into noise. He could hear alien voices shouting in languages his translator could not handle fast enough. Henderson's voice cut through the chaos, screaming with joy from the human section. The arena reset itself for the second fight. Jake now faced Zara 9 from the Nexus Collective. The cyborg champion looked at Jake with glowing blue eyes that showed no emotion at all. Jake realized that she had been analyzing his victory over Thorg and updating her combat algorithms accordingly. The arena transformed into a cyberpunk cityscape with towering buildings and neon lights. Flying cars moved through the air between massive advertisements in alien languages. Jake found himself standing on a rooftop while Zara 9 appeared on a building across the street. Without warning, she leaped across the gap between buildings like gravity meant nothing to her. Jake barely dodged her first attack. Zara 9's enhanced reflexes let her change direction in midair, turning what should have been a missed punch into a devastating kick. Jake felt the wind from her foot as it passed inches from his head. He rolled away and kept moving, knowing that standing still meant death. Zara 9 fought like a computer program designed for perfect efficiency. Every movement served a purpose. Every attack followed logically from the one before it. Jake realized that Elena had been right about the cyborg's weakness. Her computer brain needed patterns to predict and counter. Jake started fighting in the most inefficient way possible. He threw wild punches that left him completely open to counterattacks. He used awkward kicks that put him off balance. He mixed techniques from different martial arts in ways that made no sense. Every military instructor Jake had ever trained with would have been horrified by his form, but Zara 9's computer brain was designed to fight logical opponents. Jake's deliberately sloppy technique confused her prediction algorithms. She kept positioning herself to counter attacks that Jake abandoned halfway through. Her perfect reflexes worked against her when she reacted to feints and mistakes that no rational fighter would make. Jake pressed his advantage by becoming even more unpredictable. He started using objects from the cyberpunk environment as weapons. Throwing neon signs, swinging from cables, even using a flying car as a stepping stone. Zara 9's programming had prepared her to fight other champions in formal combat, not to deal with a human who treated the entire arena like a playground. The decisive moment came when Jake pretended to slip and fall off a building. Zara 9's computer brain calculated his trajectory and moved to intercept him at ground level. But Jake had grabbed a cable during his fall and swung back up to crash into the cyborg from an impossible angle. His tackle sent both of them through a massive window. Jake landed hard on a pile of broken glass and electronic equipment. Zara 9 landed face first into a bank of computer servers. Sparks flew as her internal systems tried to interface with the alien technology. The feedback overloaded her primary processing unit, causing her to convulse and shut down. The tournament master announced Zara 9's elimination due to system failure. Jake stood up slowly, bleeding from a dozen small cuts but still conscious and mobile. The alien crowd was no longer silent. Voices were rising in excitement, anger, and disbelief. Some species were clearly upset that their carefully planned tournament was not going according to script. Jake had one more opponent in the trial of strength. Kethavar the Destroyer walked into the arena like a nightmare made flesh. The Saurian champion was even more frightening up close. His green scales seemed to ripple with their own life, and his yellow eyes held the intelligence of a thinking predator. Unlike Thorg and Zara 9, Kethavar looked at Jake with something that might have been respect. The arena became a dense jungle with massive trees and thick vegetation. Jake immediately understood that this environment favored the Saurian heavily. Kethavar was a natural predator who had evolved in similar conditions. Jake was a human who had spent most of his adult life in the artificial environment of space ships. Kethavar did not charge blindly like Jake had expected. The Saurian champion moved through the jungle like a ghost, using every shadow and every sound to his advantage. Jake realized that he was now the prey in a hunting ground, designed for the perfect predator. Direct combat would be even more suicidal than it had been against Thorg. Jake started using guerrilla warfare tactics he had learned during his military service. He set simple traps using vines and fallen branches. He used the thick vegetation to break line of sight and change direction unpredictably. Most importantly, he avoided any prolonged engagement with Kethavar's claws and teeth. The Saurian's first real attack came without warning. Kethavar dropped from a tree branch 20 feet above Jake's head, claws extended and jaws open. Jake threw himself sideways and felt the claws rake across his shoulder, tearing through his shirt and drawing blood. But the attack also put Kethavar exactly where Jake had prepared for him. Jake triggered a trap made from bent saplings and sharp stones. The improvised spear launcher caught Kethavar in the side, driving a wooden point deep into his ribs. The Saurian roared in pain and anger, but Jake was already moving to the next phase of his plan. He had learned from Elena that Saurian healing used enormous amounts of energy. Jake's strategy was to inflict as many wounds as possible and let Kethavar's own biology work against him. The fight became a running battle through the alien jungle. Jake would strike quickly from ambush, inflict damage. Jake spent the night in the medical bay getting his wounds treated by alien doctors who seemed fascinated by human biology. They spoke in hushed tones while working on his cuts and bruises, occasionally making notes on their strange medical devices. Jake got the impression that they had never treated a human who had survived combat with 3 of the galaxy's deadliest champions. Elena visited him early the next morning with news that both excited and worried her. The galaxy's reaction to Jake's victories had been explosive. Some species were calling for investigations into possible cheating or rule violations. Others were demanding immediate rematches under different conditions. A few had started placing enormous bets on the remaining trials. Henderson arrived with even more disturbing information. 3 council members had formally protested Jake's advancement to the next round. They claimed that his tactics violated the spirit of honorable combat, even if they followed the technical rules of the tournament. Overlord Vexitar had been particularly vocal, calling Jake's victories accidental and unworthy of recognition. But the protest had been overruled by the Tournament Council, a separate group that managed the competition itself. The ancient rules were clear. Any method that defeated an opponent within the arena boundaries was legal. Jake's creative use of environmental hazards was unusual but perfectly acceptable according to tournament law. Jake asked what he could expect from the trial of wisdom. Elena explained that this test was different for every tournament, but it always involved solving complex problems under extreme pressure. Previous champions had faced scenarios like evacuating a space station before it exploded, or choosing which of several dying colony worlds to save with limited resources. The trial took place in a different arena, one designed to simulate any emergency situation the tournament organizers could imagine. Jake would have 30 minutes to analyze the problem and implement a solution. His performance would be judged not just on the outcome, but on his reasoning process and decision-making under stress. Henderson warned Jake that this trial might be even more challenging than combat. The other species had chosen their champions, based partly on intellectual ability as well as fighting skill. Jake's opponents would have included military strategists, scientists, and philosophers. As a salvage operator and former soldier, Jake might lack the advanced education needed to compete. Jake disagreed with Henderson's assessment. His salvage work had taught him to solve practical problems with limited resources and incomplete information. Military service had trained him to make crucial decisions quickly while lives hung in the balance. He might not have formal education in alien sciences, but he understood how to think under pressure. The trial of wisdom began with Jake standing in a simulation chamber that looked like the bridge of a massive starship. Holographic displays surrounded him, showing star charts, technical readouts, and emergency alerts in dozens of alien languages. His translator worked frantically to convert the information into English. The scenario was a nightmare that would have challenged any space professional. A colony ship carrying 50,000 beings from 12 different species was suffering catastrophic system failures. The ship's power core was overloading and would explode in exactly 30 minutes. The engines were damaged and could not reach any safe harbor in time. Jake studied the available options with growing horror. The ship had enough emergency pods to save about 30,000 people. The remaining 20,000 would die when the power core exploded. Each species had different biological requirements. Some needed specific atmospheric conditions. Others required particular temperatures or radiation levels. The traditional solution would be to save the most people possible by filling the emergency pods with individuals who had the best chance of survival. This meant prioritizing younger, healthier beings and those whose biology was most adaptable to emergency conditions. It was logical, efficient, and completely heartless. Jake looked at the passenger manifest more carefully and noticed something that changed his entire approach. The colony ship was not just carrying refugees. It was transporting the cultural treasures of 12 civilizations. Art, literature, scientific knowledge, and historical records filled the cargo holds. There were also specialized sections for teachers, artists, and scholars who preserved their species' knowledge and traditions. Jake's solution horrified the alien observers but demonstrated something they had never considered. Instead of trying to save the maximum number of individuals, he chose to preserve the future of all 12 species. He prioritized the children's sections regardless of species, then the cultural archives, then the teachers and artists who could rebuild their civilizations even with smaller populations. His reasoning was simple but profound. Survival was not just about living through today. It was about maintaining what made life worth living. 1,000 people with their culture intact could rebuild a civilization. 10,000 people without their history, art, and accumulated knowledge would become refugees forever. The simulation ended with Jake saving only 28,000 beings instead of the 30,000 that a purely logical approach would have rescued. But his solution preserved representatives from all 12 species along with their cultural heritage. The observers were stunned into silence as they realized the depth of his reasoning. Jake had one day to recover before facing the trial of willpower. Elena explained that this test was the most dangerous of all 3 trials. Alien technology would attack his mind directly, probing for weaknesses and exploiting every fear, regret, and traumatic memory he possessed. Previous champions had been reduced to gibbering madness by the psychological torture. The trial took place in a chamber that looked deceptively simple. Just a comfortable chair surrounded by strange machines that hummed with barely contained energy. Jake sat down and felt sensors attaching themselves to his head and arms. The machines began their work immediately, diving into his memories like digital sharks. Jake's mind was flooded with visions designed to break his will. He saw Earth burning as alien fleets destroyed every city. His family and friends died screaming while he watched helplessly from space. Every mistake he had ever made was amplified and twisted until his failures seemed monstrous and unforgivable. The machines showed him alternative histories where his victories in the tournament had been accidents. They created scenarios where his success led to Earth's destruction by jealous alien races. They whispered that he was weak, worthless, and responsible for the suffering of everyone he cared about. But Jake had advantages that the alien torturers did not understand. His military training included resistance to psychological warfare and interrogation techniques. More importantly, his human psychology was fundamentally different from the alien minds the machines were designed to break. The Saurian champions had been broken when the machines showed them the end of their warrior culture. Their entire identity was based on strength and dominance, so visions of weakness and defeat destroyed them. The Nexus collective cyborgs fractured when forced to experience pure emotion without the buffer of logical processing. The crystal golems crumbled when confronted with the temporary nature of all existence. Jake's human mind handled trauma differently. Years of military service had taught him to compartmentalize painful experiences and focus on the mission at hand. He acknowledged the visions of failure and loss without letting them paralyze him. He accepted the possibility that his actions might have negative consequences, while still believing that inaction would be worse. The machines grew more desperate, as Jake endured vision after vision without breaking. They showed him his worst. Memories from military service, friends dying in combat, civilians caught in crossfire, orders that led to disasters. They amplified his guilt and self-doubt until the psychological pressure should have crushed any rational mind. Instead, Jake used the pain as fuel for determination. Every vision of failure reminded him why he was fighting. Every traumatic memory proved that he had survived impossible situations before. The machines were trying to convince him that he was weak, but his own experiences proved that humans could endure suffering that would destroy other species. Hours passed as the psychological assault continued. Jake felt his mental defenses weakening, but he refused to surrender. He thought about Henderson's faith in him, Elena's careful preparations, and the billions of humans watching from Earth. He thought about Overlord Vextar's dismissive comments about human weakness. Most of all, he thought about proving that humanity belonged among the stars. The machines finally shut down after detecting that their psychological assault was actually strengthening Jake's resolve instead of breaking it. The alien technicians stared at their instruments in disbelief, unable to understand how a human mind could process trauma so differently from every other species they had studied. Jake stood up from the chair on shaking legs, drained but still conscious and coherent. The trial of willpower was complete, and he had passed where champions from supposedly superior species had failed. Around him, alien observers whispered in languages his translator struggled to follow. Elena was waiting outside the testing chamber with tears in her eyes. The entire galaxy watched as Jake Morrison walked into the Council's ancient ceremonial arena. This was not the high-tech chamber where the tournament trials had taken place, but a simple stone circle that had existed for over 3,000 years. The first council meetings had been held in this exact location, and the stones had witnessed the birth of galactic civilization itself. Overlord Vextar waited in the center of the arena, and Jake finally understood why the alien leader inspired such fear and respect. Vextar stood nearly 9 feet tall with skin that looked like polished silver and eyes that glowed with their own inner light. His body was a perfect fusion of biological evolution and technological enhancement, not crude like the cyborg champions, but seamless and elegant like a living work of art. The architect spoke in a voice that carried easily through the arena without any electronic amplification. He explained that Jake's victories in the tournament had been impressive accidents, but they proved nothing about human worthiness. Real strength, Vextar claimed, came from millennia of evolution and advancement, not from primitive cunning and luck. Jake listened to the speech and realized that Vextar genuinely believed every word he was saying. The architect leader was not being cruel or dismissive. He simply could not conceive of a universe where his species was not the natural apex of intelligence and capability. This absolute certainty would be both Vextar's greatest strength and his hidden weakness. The rules for their combat were ancient and simple. No weapons, no environmental changes, no time limits. The fight would continue until one opponent surrendered, was rendered unconscious, or died. Jake noticed that surrender had been mentioned first, suggesting that the original creators of these rules had valued mercy as much as strength. Vextar moved with fluid grace that made Jake's previous opponents look clumsy by comparison. The architect's enhanced body combined the best features of dozens of species: saurian strength, cyborg reflexes, crystalline durability, and improvements that Jake could not even identify. Every movement was perfectly calculated and devastatingly effective. The first exchange of attacks lasted less than 10 seconds and left Jake bleeding from 3 different wounds. Vextar's strikes were too fast to see and too precise to avoid completely. Jake realized that all of his previous tactical advantages had been neutralized. Environmental hazards, unpredictable behavior, and guerrilla warfare would not work against an opponent who had literally helped design the galaxy's military strategies. Jake changed his approach completely. Instead of trying to outfight Vextar, he began studying the architect's movements and looking for patterns. Every species had behavioral quirks based on their evolution and culture. Even perfect beings had to follow some kind of internal logic. Vextar fought like someone who had never truly been challenged. His techniques were flawless, and his power was overwhelming. But Jake began to notice something crucial. The architect. Leader fought with the confidence of absolute superiority. He did not adapt his tactics because he had never needed to. His overwhelming advantages had always been enough to crush any opposition. Jake started making seemingly desperate moves that forced Vextar into positions where his technological advantages became limitations. The architect's perfect balance could be turned against him with the right leverage. His enhanced reflexes could be overwhelmed by attacks from multiple angles simultaneously. Most importantly, his absolute confidence could be shaken by tactics that did not follow any logical pattern. The fight continued for over an hour, with Jake taking tremendous damage but refusing to fall. Vextar grew increasingly frustrated as his perfect techniques failed to finish off the stubborn human. Jake could see confusion beginning to replace confidence in the architect's glowing eyes. Jake realized that Vextar's greatest weakness was the same thing that made him so dangerous. He had been the apex predator for so long that he had stopped growing. The architect leader had perfected his abilities millennia ago and never felt the need to innovate or adapt. He was fighting the same way his species had fought for thousands of years. The decisive moment came when Jake did something that violated every principle of combat that Vextar understood. Instead of trying to avoid the architect's most devastating attack, Jake deliberately moved into it while launching his own assault. The move should have been suicide. Jake took damage that would have killed any normal human, but it also put him inside Vextar's guard at exactly the right angle. Jake's desperate gambit worked, because Vextar had never faced an opponent willing to accept certain death in order to create a single moment of opportunity. The architect's enhanced reflexes and tactical computers had no programming for dealing with an enemy who embraced mutual destruction as a valid strategy. Jake's counterattack caught Vextar completely off balance. For the first time in the fight, the architect leader staggered backward with genuine surprise on his face. Jake pressed his advantage with a series of attacks that sacrificed defense completely in favor of maximum damage. He fought like someone who had already accepted death and was determined to make it count. Vextar tried to adapt to Jake's suicidal tactics, but adaptation required time and experience that he no longer possessed. The architect leader had grown too comfortable with overwhelming superiority. He had forgotten how to fight from a position of disadvantage or uncertainty. Jake's final attack was not a technique that any martial arts instructor would have recognized. It combined desperation, determination, and a complete willingness to die if necessary. Jake used Vextar's own momentum and overconfidence against him, turning the architect's strength into a weapon that defeated itself. Both fighters crashed to the stone floor of the arena. Jake's body was broken in more places than he could count, and he could taste blood in his mouth. But Vextar lay motionless beside him, unconscious and defeated for the first time in his incredibly long life. The silence in the arena was absolute. Thousands of alien observers stared down at the impossible sight of their greatest leader lying defeated by a species they had considered primitive and weak. Jake struggled to his feet, swaying but still conscious, and looked up at the stunned faces surrounding him. Henderson's voice broke the silence, screaming with joy and disbelief from the human section. Other voices joined in, some celebrating, others arguing, and many simply expressing shock at what they had witnessed. The carefully ordered hierarchy of galactic civilization had been shattered by a single human who refused to accept his supposed limitations. Jake helped Vextar sit up as the architect leader regained consciousness. The alien's glowing eyes had dimmed considerably, but they held a new expression that Jake had never seen before, respect mixed with genuine curiosity. Vextar admitted that he had underestimated both Jake personally and humanity as a species. The architect leader asked Jake how he had found the strength to continue fighting when victory seemed impossible. Jake's answer was simple but profound. Humans had spent their entire existence learning to fight from positions of weakness. They had survived by adapting, innovating, and refusing to surrender even when logic suggested they should. Vextar nodded slowly as he began to understand. His species had achieved perfection so long ago that they had forgotten how to grow. They had become masters of everything they already knew, but had lost the ability to learn genuinely new things. Humanity's greatest strength was not any single capability, but their endless capacity for change and adaptation. Jake's victory speech was broadcast across the galaxy to billions of viewers from hundreds of species. He did not boast about human superiority or threaten revenge against those who had doubted Earth's worthiness. Instead, he talked about what he had learned from each opponent he had faced. Jake explained that Thorg's crystalline endurance had taught him the value of patience and persistence. Zara 9's mechanical precision had shown him the importance of logical thinking and careful planning. Kethvar's predatory skill had demonstrated the power of instinct and adaptability. Even Vextar's defeat had been a lesson. It had shown that perfection could become a limitation if it prevented further growth. The human champion suggested that the Council's system of determining political power through combat had made all of their species weaker by discouraging cooperation and innovation. Instead of fighting each other for dominance, they could achieve far more by learning from each other's unique strengths and perspectives. Jake's words sparked debates that would continue for years throughout galactic society. Some species rejected his message completely, clinging to traditional ideas about strength and superiority. Others began serious discussions about reforming the council system to encourage collaboration instead of competition. The immediate result was a dramatic change in Earth's status within galactic civilization. Humanity was no longer seen as the weak newcomer struggling to prove their worth. They had become a species that other civilizations wanted to understand, trade with, and learn from. Jake Morrison returned to his salvage ship, but his life had changed forever. The Iron Phoenix was no longer just a home for a lonely scrap dealer. It had become a symbol of human ingenuity and determination. Requests for interviews, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges flooded in from species across the galaxy. Jake woke up in a room that was too clean and too quiet. The council had given him quarters in the champion section of their main building. Everything was white and smooth, like the inside of an egg. He missed his cramped ship with its familiar sounds and smells. This place felt like a hospital or a tomb. Ambassador Henderson arrived early with breakfast and a woman Jake had not met before. She was short with dark hair and carried a tablet computer that seemed to hold her complete attention. Henderson introduced her as Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Earth's top expert on alien biology and behavior. She had studied every species in the council for the past 3 years. Elena barely looked up from her tablet as she spoke. Her voice was quick and precise, like she was reading from a scientific report. She told Jake that she had spent the night analyzing video recordings of previous tournaments. The news was not encouraging, but she had found some information that might help him survive longer than expected. The tournament had 3 parts, just like Henderson had mentioned the day before. Elena explained each one in detail while showing Jake videos on her tablet. The trial of strength was straight combat between champions. The trial of wisdom tested how well a fighter could solve problems under extreme pressure. The trial of willpower used alien technology to attack the mind and spirit directly. Elena showed Jake footage of Kethvar fighting in previous tournaments. The Saurian moved like liquid violence, flowing from one attack to another without stopping. His claws could cut through metal, and his tail could break bones with a casual swipe. The most frightening thing was how fast he healed. Elena had seen him regrow a severed arm in less than 5 minutes during one fight. But Elena had noticed something interesting about saurian biology. They healed quickly, but the process used enormous amounts of energy. In longer fights, Kethvar had shown signs of getting tired. His healing got slower and his movements became less precise. Most opponents never lasted long enough to see this weakness, but it was there. Next, Elena showed Jake videos of Zara 9 in action. The cyborg moved with mechanical precision that was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. She could calculate the exact angle and force needed for every attack. Her enhanced reflexes let her react to dangers before they became threatening. Elena had watched her dodge laser beams and catch bullets with her bare hands. The Nexus Collective's weakness was harder to spot, but Elena thought she had found it. Their computer brains worked by analyzing patterns and predicting what would happen next. They were perfect at fighting opponents who used standard martial arts or military tactics. But Elena had noticed that Zara 9 seemed confused when facing truly random or chaotic attacks. Her computer brain needed patterns to work with. The videos of Thorg Ironhide were the most disturbing. The crystal being did not fight so much as endure. He would stand perfectly still while opponents attacked him with everything they had. Swords shattered against his body. Energy weapons left no marks. Explosions only made him shine brighter. When his enemies exhausted themselves, Thorg would move forward like a living mountain and crush them. Elena admitted that she had found no clear weakness in golem physiology. Their crystal bodies were nearly indestructible, and they felt no pain. They could survive in space without air or in the heart of a volcano without protection. The only advantage she could see was that golems moved very slowly compared to other species. They relied on their invincibility instead of speed or skill. Henderson interrupted Elena's scientific lecture to discuss the political situation. He explained that the council members were already making bets on how quickly Jake would lose. Most aliens gave him less than 5 minutes in his first fight. Some species representatives had suggested that humans should withdraw from the tournament to avoid embarrassment. The worst insults came from Overlord Vextar, the council's senior member. His species, called the Architects, had founded the council thousands of years ago. Vextar had publicly stated that humans were too primitive and violent to deserve membership. He seemed to view the tournament as a chance to prove his point by watching Earth's champion get destroyed. Elena showed Jake recordings of Vextar's speeches over the past 2 days. The architect leader was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished metal. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never been seriously challenged. He spoke about humans the way a person might discuss insects or bacteria, as something small and unimportant that would soon be forgotten. This gave Jake his first moment of real anger since arriving at Nexus Prime. He had been nervous and scared, but listening to Vextar dismiss all of humanity made something hot and hard form in his chest. He told Henderson and Elena that he was tired of being treated like he had already lost. Maybe he would get beaten, but he planned to make the other champions work for their victory. Elena seemed pleased by Jake's anger. She explained that emotion could be a powerful tool if used correctly. The other champions were used to opponents who fought with cold logic or pure instinct. A human who fought with controlled fury might surprise them. She warned Jake not to let anger make him stupid, but said it could give him the extra strength he needed. Henderson took Jake on a tour of the arena to help him understand the environment where he would fight. The massive space was empty now, but Henderson explained how it worked. The walls and floor contained millions of tiny machines that could reshape matter in seconds. The arena could become any place imaginable: a burning desert, an icy mountain, a space station, or an alien jungle. Jake asked if he would get to choose the fighting environment. Henderson shook his head and explained that the arena picked settings randomly for each fight. This was supposed to make the tournament fair by preventing champions from training for specific conditions. Of course, some species adapted better to certain environments than others. They spent the afternoon watching training videos and discussing basic strategies. Elena had prepared detailed files on each opponent's fighting style, but she admitted that book learning could only help so much. Jake would have to adapt quickly once the real fighting started. As evening approached, Jake felt his nervousness returning. Henderson noticed his mood and suggested they visit the observation deck to watch the sunset over Nexus Prime. The view was stunning. 3 different colored suns setting behind the floating cities while alien ships moved through, the sky like schools of fish. Henderson told Jake about his own first days on Nexus Prime 3 years ago. He had felt overwhelmed by the size and strangeness of everything. The other ambassadors had treated him like a curiosity at best and an annoyance at worst. Earth was the newest member of the Council, and many species questioned whether humans deserved to be there at all. But Henderson had learned something important during his time as Earth's representative. The older species in the Council had grown comfortable with their power and status. They followed the same patterns and made the same assumptions year after year. This made them predictable, even if it also made them dangerous. Jake asked Henderson what he thought would happen if Earth's champion lost badly in the tournament. The ambassador was quiet for a long moment before answering. He explained that losing was expected. Earth was still new to galactic society. But if Jake lost without showing any courage or skill, it would confirm what species like Vextars already believed about human weakness. On the other hand, if Jake could put up a real fight before losing, it would earn respect from some council members. And if by some miracle Jake actually won a fight or two, it would force the entire galaxy to reconsider their opinions about humanity. Henderson left Jake alone on the observation deck as full darkness fell over Nexus Prime. The alien city sparkled, with lights of every color and strange music drifted up from the streets below. Jake thought about his old life aboard the Iron Phoenix, floating through empty space and fixing broken things. That life seemed very far away now. Tomorrow the tournament would begin, and Jake would face opponents who were stronger, faster, and more experienced than any human had ever fought. He knew the odds were against him. He knew that most of the galaxy expected him to fail quickly and quietly. But Jake also knew something that his opponents and their supporters did not fully understand. Humans had spent their entire history fighting against impossible odds. They had survived ice ages, and plagues, wars, and disasters that should have destroyed them. Maybe that experience would count for something in the arena. Jake looked up at the alien stars and made himself a promise. Win or lose, he would show the galaxy what it meant to be human. He would fight with everything he had, and he would make sure that no one forgot Earth's first real appearance on the galactic stage.